experience, there is very little functional shame in Unitarian Universalism. Maybe your experience differs, but we tend not to be among the faith traditions that believe in using the tools of shame or fear on a regular basis. Except when it comes to environmentalism at times. Go to a social justice meeting, for example, and show up with a styrofoam cup. You better check your exits. You think I'm kidding. We don't tend to use a whole lot of shame, except in this regard. I am of the reduce, reuse, and recycle generation. It was everywhere when I was growing up. And the children of my generation in the 80s kind of became a little bit like the environmental police. Do I have anyone here in this generation who maybe went home very strongly telling parents exactly where every object should go and the sin of not reducing, recycling, or reusing? Can I get a witness? Now, this is in and of itself not entirely bad that we reduce, reuse, and recycle. I don't mean to reverse shame those of us who do it or suggest that you should stop doing it. But I want to point out some ethical inconsistencies in my own behavior. Case in point. Guilt will plague me if for some reason when I'm traveling, I have to use a plastic water bottle. Maybe I forgot my reusable water bottle. Maybe there are no water sources except those that are in a plastic bottle. And so I purchase one, fully intent on recycling it, right? Mm-hmm. But maybe I'm in a place where I cannot find a single receptacle. Maybe even hypothetically, of course, before I have to go into public confession, maybe even hypothetically, I carry this empty plastic water bottle with me for hours in search of a recycling bin in which to place it. And at some point, maybe hypothetically 12 hours into this search, I finally give up the ghost and place this plastic water bottle in the trash. You see what I mean? I will feel the hot shame of having placed that plastic water bottle in the trash for hours, if not days. I can actually consider the evil that my hand has wrought. And yet, somehow, I don't feel such things when I have to take a flight across the country. Mm-hmm. And yet somehow I don't feel such things when I have to get in the minivan to pick up our children. And yet somehow I don't feel such things when I look at our 3 children. These are uncomfortable ethical inconsistencies. On the one hand, I know there's something powerful about what you can touch, and it makes sense that the plastic water bottle haunts me in the images of a washed up dead whale whose belly is filled, right, with plastic, including, I believe, my single water bottle that I thought would stay in a landfill, but now in my awakening, I see has not stayed in a landfill for millennia, but instead has washed away into the ocean, the bottle in a whale, and the small ring that once held the cap to the bottle now choking a turtle. I know you've seen these images, right? Yes. Oh, yes. Now, again, I'm not trying to shame those reducing, recycling, and reusing, or shame those of us putting plastic water bottles in the trash anymore. We should be doing these practices of reducing, recycling, and reusing. They're good. But I'm curious about these ethical inconsistencies, and moreover, something else, an emotional numbing that I feel taking over my own life these days when I consider the enormity of the climate crisis. Massive governments, right, including our own, and forces greater than any one of us must align and come together in order to stop the acceleration of devastation. I recently heard that if the nuclear arms race could be timed to a 24-hour clock that ends with nuclear war, we are about 5 minutes to midnight. This is what the UN is teaching. Of particular concern, they say, is the conflict between India and Pakistan, both of whom possess nuclear weapons. If even one of these weapons were to be deployed because of their strength today, which is 10 times that of the bombs that we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, if just one of these were to be deployed, we would have an unstoppable chain reaction on the climate crisis. We would not be able to keep temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. In fact, right now, without any nuclear engagement, temperatures are set to increase by 2100 somewhere in the range of 3 to 5 degrees Celsius or 5.4 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit. This is well past the limit that scientists say we must avoid in order to stop and prevent catastrophic events. While 16-year-old Greta Thunberg leads global climate strikes, as I watch the news and listen to the reports and read the science, I cannot help but feel a sense of devastation that leads me to fluctuate somewhere between emotional flatness or numbness of just shutting off and shutting down and backing out to somewhere of the hot shame of my plastic water bottle. But here's the truth. Shame is useless. It's irrational, it's counter to change, and it's exactly what our spiritual ancestors fought against. Our Universalist ancestors, they knew this. They were criticized rampantly for preaching an all-loving God who would not let go, who loved all, and who would not create a hell in which any of us would go to suffer. They said God was so loving and so expansive that no one could escape this love. Reverend Dr. Mark Morrison Reed has described their theology as really teaching that each of us would be dragged kicking and screaming into heaven. That's radical inclusion. The fire and brimstone, as well as the status quo churches of the day, said, don't tell people that. If they aren't afraid or ashamed, how will they ever possibly conform? People won't just be good for goodness sake. You have to have hell. You have to have fear. You have to shame them, or they'll be sinful. But the Universalists, they kept pushing against this. God, they said, did not want us consumed with shame or shackled by the chains of fear. No, they said, God is love, and love endures. It is infinite and boundless. And all these centuries later, I happen to still believe them. Shame does not serve anyone but those who want to have power over you. And the world is certainly not healed or restored through the production of shame. I have difficulty believing that even an ounce or an otter of Mother Nature rejoices in the production of our shame. But nor does emotional numbing or checking out serve Mother Earth. Mm-hmm. When I was in Arizona with the San Carlos Apache tribe fighting to help preserve their indigenous sovereignty and their right to Oak Flat, which is sacred land that is set to be transferred in January of 2020 to a copper mining company who will devastate and pollute the air, the water, and the land, and people's bodies we know already will be riddled with cancer in the surrounding towns around the mine. When I got there, I was feeling incredibly ragged. I had just had a tight connection with the time difference. I'd been running up to the plane and running off of the plane, and I was in this kind of it's any other day state of mind. So I started collecting the testimonies and doing the work of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival. I knew we were fighting a monster project with big money, and that we were fighting our own federal government that had sold the land off. I was attentive and listening, but I was shut down. Shortly after I got there, Wensler Nosey Sr., who's one of the leaders in the San Carlos Apache tribe and whose quote is at the beginning of our order of service this day, he said that we would begin by marching all day from one sacred site to another in Oak Flat. And it was kind of cold out. It was the desert. It was a time of year when, on first glance, there wasn't a whole lot of green or any beautiful flowers blooming. He said a couple of things. One, I'd already told you, that I would have dreams while I was there and that I would have to tell others about the dreams in order to understand them. But he also said something else. He said that I needed to participate in the march because marching and really reconnecting with the earth was critical to understanding the story of Oak Flat and exactly what we were fighting for. He said that I needed to learn what he called the first chapter. He said, every one of you activists, you start on the second chapter. But you need to understand the first chapter of the struggle of indigenous people for liberation on this land that you now call the United States of America. I'll be honest, I wasn't entirely thrilled about marching. And at first, all I could feel was the cold. And I kept studying where the sun was to determine how much longer we were possibly going to march that day. Mm-hmm. But after a while, I stopped pushing everything out and I started listening. I heard the sound of the little bits of grass in the wind. I became attuned to noticing when I heard the gurgle of water and we were approaching a stream. I paid attention to the rocks beneath my feet, and when there was a dip in the land, and when we were climbing, and when the path was curving around. And as I started to listen, I started to let the earth connect with me once more. And at first, I felt this deep sadness. It's hard to know if it was my own lament and my own sadness, or the sadness of the struggle in this place that had been waging for so long. Mining that had already wrecked water and earth and air in the towns outside of Oak Flat. For so long I had pushed away connecting with the earth, afraid that the immensity of pain and the crisis would just overtake me and consume me. But the more that I listened to, the more I noticed the beauty, the brilliance, the fullness of the story. I came to touch what our Universalist ancestors taught, that love endures. And you see, when you understand love endures, you begin to understand how life endures. When you allow yourself to lament, on the other side of lament is prophecy and a path forward. All that time I had spent shutting the natural world out, being numb, I had also closed myself off to beauty. There's a story that my colleague recently in California, Reverend Dr. Beth Johnson, she's a UU minister, out near San Diego told me that I had never heard before and is true. So I got a lot of questions after the first service. Are you sure that's true? I did check my sources. So what I'm about to tell you is totally true. This is not like one of those stories that ministers sometimes tell and the fish gets bigger each time. Not that we do that. So there's a story of a family, the Almeida family, who in 1982 got a pet tortoise. And they named him Manuela. And Manuela was sort of the center of family activities. They loved him dearly. And the two children, played with him all the time. I don't know how you play with a tortoise exactly, but at any rate, he was a part of the family. Well, the Almeida family needed to have some home repairs done. And so there was a period of time where they had a whole bunch of workers coming in and out of the house all the time, opening the gate, opening the back door. You know where the story's going, right?
Yes.
Well, one day, at the end of the day, they looked around for Manuela, and he was gone. They searched the entire house, everywhere, the backyard. They asked the neighbors, but no one had seen Manuela escape. They were very sad. And they had a little service for Manuela and told one another stories of how much he meant to them. And then, frankly, life kind of went on, as life will do. In 2012, the father in the Almeida family passed away. And so it came to the two children to go and clean out the house, particularly his study. Now, apparently, Mr. Almeida was a big hoarder. And so his office contained just stacks of papers, several TVs that were broken that he fully intended on repairing and then gifting to someone. Talk about Nancy's gifts from family members, right? There was furniture in there that was broken and he had said one day he would repair. Just tons of stuff. I mean, the room was just filled to the edges. And so it took several hours. They started cleaning through everything. And at one point, they even discovered that some of the furniture was being eaten by termites and that they had termites in the house. So finally, at the end of the day, they're getting pretty tired. And one of the kids picks up a box. Got all sorts of papers in it. And he starts to take it out when he notices something is moving underneath the papers. So he puts the box down very carefully, and he starts to walk away, and then curiosity gets the best of him, and he takes the papers up. And guess what's underneath the papers? Manuela. They're alive and well 30 years later. So apparently, he survived across those 30 years on the bugs that were in their father's office. Isn't that lovely? And somehow he went unnoticed in this entire time. So what's the lesson here? Don't be too tidy if you have a lost creature in your home. I think that this story, in a very strange way, tells us that indeed life does endure. Look at the most tenacious weed that finds its way through the cracks in concrete, right? Look at all the ways in which, even as the devastation unrolls on our earth, life force, Mother Earth, is pushing back. One of the teachings that Wenzler gave me is remember, Mother Earth might just shake us off one day entirely. When the enormity of this crisis hits me, and I find myself slowly slipping away, numbing, shutting down, I take my life back to Mother Earth. At the foot of a mountain, at the edge of the ocean, looking up to an ancient tree, I am reminded we are connected. Love endures. Life endures. I'm reminded that someday we all will feed the trees, and that generations before us have as well. In the words of former Chairman Winsler, I know how my father saw the world and how his father before him, and that is how I see the world. Love endures. Life endures. This is what Winsler taught me, to see the world not as a certainty, but as a continuity. As the poet today taught, when you hear thunder, hear it as applause. Instead of the impossibility or the spiritual foreclosure of shame or the frozen emotional numbness, instead I choose to believe in a love that endures and life that can yet endure. And in this way, we are liberated and empowered, not diminished, but strengthened, not captive, but free. The balance of any single justice issue does not depend on you doing everything, but instead maintaining a practice of listening to hear the one thing you must do. This is a spiritual practice that saves even more than 2 degrees. Beyond shame or the pain of aloneness, our faith teaches that love endures and life endures. I believe until we understand this with our full selves, we will not collectively be able to cease this machine. We must know that our value is far past that which we do, that we are already enough. And it is out of this strength of our enoughness that we can restore the earth. When we know that our solutions are not driven by an endless desire to do more so that we can be good enough, we then can see how restoration is yet possible. We restore ourselves to the earth. Here, love endures, life endures, and what's more, we find the strength to rise one more day for all the days we are given.